relates also to the other things we presented. Magali is from Brunel University of London. This is a university concentrating on the relation between social issues, space, and society. It's a branch of human geography, a very interesting branch. And Magali will take a case study of gentrification plus first of all, of an attempt, of a goodwill attempt to how to transform a part of the city and what came about in a very unintended way. And I think this case study from London, this case study can serve also as a kind of exemplar for comparable processes around the world going on today. So this is not just a specific case.
Good evening,
Magali?
everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me taking part in this conference. And sorry, I'm not able to be in Portugal with you all, but I have been traveling a little bit through all those presentations, discovering Guimarães. Sorry for the pronunciation. So thank you very much. I'm now, as in the introduction was said, I'm going to take you to London, and particularly a northern suburb of London, so probably not somewhere you would go if you were to visit London, on a large regeneration project and particularly concentrating on the regeneration of a council housing um, estate. And a large regeneration projects are happening across London and everywhere in London. And the 10-year targets for net housing completion in the 2021 London plan is of an additional of nearly 500,000, more than 500,000 additional homes. And in order to meet these targets, the regeneration of former council estates as well as brownfield sites will continue to allow for housing intensification and densification. We are in London in what we called a housing crisis. Although I have to note there are variations between the different boroughs that constitute the City of London, and they also, in terms of the number of housing they are targeted to deliver, but also not all boroughs meet their targets or want to meet their targets. I concentrate particularly on the borough of Barnet, which is in the north of the city, and in an area within that borough, the area of Colindale, which is undergoing a major transformation with a combination of new build developments on brownfield sites, tens of thousands of new homes, as well as the regeneration of the Grand Park estate, which you can see here. So this regeneration presence, of course, has always many promises and opportunities, but my work focuses on the meanwhile. The Grand Park estate is an example of those municipal dreams of the past, as it has been described, of brutalist architecture, of public housing built in the 1960s. But from there, since then, it has been in a state of managed decline, as the literature would have it, and its regeneration has been particularly lengthy. It started 20 years ago, and it is planned to be finished in 2036. That's one of the most optimistic deadline, and the goalpost keeping pushed. Initially, residents were able, so mostly residents who had what we call statutory rights to housing here in the UK, so social housing residents, were able to organize themselves, were consulted, and played a role in the elaboration of the original master plan and its agreement, which recovered the rehousing of social housing tenants on secure tenancy. However, since it's taken so long, many residents have been in that lengthy period have left or been rehoused elsewhere. And in the meantime, a lot of the new residents who've come into the area are residents who are on temporary accommodation. So in the UK, we are in a housing crisis in many different ways, but we also have, because such a shortage of social housing, we have many residents now called temporary residents. Temporary doesn't necessarily mean it's short. It just means that they have, again, no statutory rights to housing, and so can be moved from one place to another as and when accommodation comes up. But on this estate, about 50% of residents are on temporary housing, which means that they probably won't be rehoused on the estate or have any voice into the current development of this estate. However, once the estate is regenerated, completed, it will be a combination of housing tenures. Again, in the UK, we have such an array of housing tenures between, at the moment, it will be private homes, shared ownerships, affordable homes for rent, as well as the more traditional social rented homes. We also have to contend here with a lot of changes on the estate, which are to do with the area more broadly. As I said, this council housing estate is a very large estate, the largest in the borough, is juxtaposed by the redevelopment of brownfield sites, new build development, so vertical housing everywhere. And it's also important to take into account that we are in a suburban context in an outer borough. Outer boroughs have had more space to allow for this expansion to happen in London. And we've seen a number of outer boroughs, such as here, Colindale, Anfield, Wembley, Croydon, be the space for this kind of large redevelopment with tens of thousands of new homes in such a scale. So I don't know if you have the opportunity to even travel for anything. Wembley would be a good example to see the scale of such large and dense and vertical development. And so this is all happening very, very fast. The area I'm looking at also has been identified as an opportunity area by the Mayor's London plan. And those areas are key locations with potential for new homes, jobs, and infrastructures of all types. Many are linked to existing and potential public transport improvements and typically have a capacity of at least 2,500 new homes and 5,000 new jobs, or a combination of the two. So infrastructure and collaborative planning are key to the delivery, according to the Mayor's London plan, to those opportunity areas. In many cases, opportunities area require major investment in transport and proper planning of utilities, social infrastructures, which is one of the foci here, and digital connectivity to support the day-to-day lives of Londoners. However, despite the promises of what these opportunity areas will be, as I said, it's an area of managed decline. It's an area that has suffered from historical levels of deprivation. And so just to kind of give a context, the literature, especially in the London context, but the literature on gentrification has paid quite a lot of attention to the redevelopment of council housing estate, which has been described as state-led gentrification and operates as para-public redevelopment. So collaboration, corporative interest with public money. And as it's sized by the state and capital in a moment of accumulation by disposition, to quote Elliot Cooper et al. And of course, within that, we see the remaining stigmas of living on sink estates playing a part in the increasing vulnerability of residents, and not just of council tenants, but of people on temporary accommodation, as well as homeowners, people on these estates under the right to buy scheme by Thatcher were able to buy their properties, but are now at the mercy of compulsory purchases. So the literature on gentrification in particular has addressed the many consequences of estate gentrification as a form of unhoming as it's a form of involuntary mobility. We've seen people such as Saskia Sassen or Paul Watt looking at the logics of expulsions. And it's just been described often as a form of violence, a form of slow violence. In my case, adopting a semiological lens, so looking at the social harm incurred by this form of gentrification, as people's lives on this estate are suffering from very poor and precarious housing conditions, as well as housing insecurity. So the instability of not knowing when people are going to be displaced or decanted, as it's called by developers. So, in my opinion, while addressing the questions of gentrification-induced displacement remains salient, especially as it affects, in particular, minoritized and marginalized groups, it is important to also consider further what is happening in the meanwhile of estate regeneration. And some authors, like Paul Watt, have indeed looked at the experience of living on those estates as they are undergoing very lengthy regeneration. I mentioned this estate as already, and these are recent pictures, but you can see that's 20 years on and very little has changed. It's just been left in a state of decline with very little investment because people think it's going to be regenerated, so why invest? So it has been described by Paul Watt indeed as a form of psychosocial degeneration for the people who are living on the estate while it's being regenerated. And my work focuses on this experience of the meanwhile. What happens as regeneration takes time, is not happening, or will happen soon. So I'm looking at this experience from the perspective of the work conducted by a charity organization based on the Graham Park Estate in Colindale, a charity organization called the Colindale Communities Trust, who has in the past 10 years been supporting the community, who, as I've said, have suffered historical levels of deprivation in this managed decline. And this has been compounded in recent years by the pandemic, the cost of living crisis, and the changing context of the regeneration. And of course, we know we have had in the UK many years of austerity measures under the coalition and Conservative government, and more to come under the Labour government at the moment. So the residents on the estate not only have to contend with austerity, with a withdrawal of the welfare state, but they also have to contend with very poor housing in the time of the regeneration. So this is what the Colindale Communities Trust does, is support residents in all areas of their, in many areas of their life, which I will explain in a minute. The research I'm talking about today is based on many years of working with the Colindale Communities Trust, so slightly different to the presentation so far. I'm senior lecturer in social sciences, in sociology and criminology, and my work is principally done through ethnographic research. So I've spent a long time with them. I also was privileged enough to have research leave to spend 6 months working at the Colindale Communities Trust and observe from a more direct perspective their operational and strategic activities. I was able to collect data in many different ways, collect semi-structured interview, run various workshops, and from these data collected in 6 months, I'm presenting some of the findings. So as I said, the Colindale Communities Trust is basically running the community hub in the area. They're based in the old library building at the moment, and hopefully, if the business case is in their favor, they will run the community center when the estate is regenerated. But nothing is less certain because it's a neoliberal and competitive environment, even for the voluntary and charity sector. But to go back to what they're doing and how they are supporting residents in the meanwhile of regeneration, I will highlight the fact that they are playing a key connecting role, building on their local knowledge and trust. They have worked in many different aspects and areas in which people are living in these poor housing conditions are. I'll skip that. Sorry, I'm just quite aware of the time. What came out of my research was a report and a magazine, and I will draw on that to show you some of the key findings and some of the illustrations that come with it. So I'll skip a little bit here. So this was the magazine that was produced out of the 6 months of research and illustrated the perspectives of living on the estate by residents through also working with the various activities that they took part in during that time at the CCT. So the CCT, the Colindale Communities Trust, is very particular because they're based on the estate and they have to connect residents, and they play a key role as what we call an anchor organization. So they connect residents with various statutory and non-statutory organization. So they play a key connective role. They're at grassroots level, but they know how the system works, and help residents in the areas of health, well-being, employment, mostly. But mostly what they do is that they are supporting residents through resilience and sustainability at the heart of the community, and addressing mostly the issue around precarity and poverty on this estate. They support residents in access to social benefits and the non-take-up of social benefits by giving them information and advice or directly liaising with the relevant statutory services. They've managed to build a lot of trust and knowledge. They support residents in the area of employment. They connect residents to a web of services. So often the fact that they provide so many different activities is how they can manage to reach out to people. A lot of people who live on the estate are nowhere near ready for employment. As I said, they have, oh, I'm so sorry. They have suffered from historical levels of deprivation, and therefore it's generational as well, and people are very far away from employment. But people can come for a cup of coffee, a coffee morning, and then connect with the services that they need. And that is one way to call it an anchor organization, as exemplified here by this little comic that was drawn by one of the residents who attend the Colindale Communities Trust, who came in as a migrant from Hong Kong to learn a bit of English, to meet some people at the coffee morning, but then was connected through to training, ESOL classes, and generally kind of like also supporting the building of our social capital by meeting new people. And this is very unique form of service that you do not get by social services who are very siloed, who will look at helping people in employment or on health and services. This gather people in a wraparound fashion that's pretty unique. They also play a key role in health and well-being. They act as they work with community responders, and have been working with the local general practitioner, doctors, and social prescribers, as we call them here. They're part of what we have now in the UK called integrated care systems and integrated care board, because the government is trying to move to a more community-based kind of health services, more preventative. So they work on a lot of preventative aspect of health and well-being. And they actively engage in a program of research with those care boards. And as exemplified here in this body map created by one of my participants during one of the body map storytelling workshop, residents valued the opportunity of this community center, because it gave them connection with other people that really counterbalance all the negative. So it gave them a social capital that counterbalanced the negative impacts of living in poor housing conditions, which they really stressed how much of an impact they had, not only on their physical health, so living with mold, living with rats, with mice, with the antisocial behavior surrounding the estate and the state of neglect. But what was the kind of savior in these conditions was the ability to have a center to turn towards for direct help with benefits, but food vouchers, but also just the opportunity of a warm place, as well as the opportunity to actually meet people, and the connection that this gave them support and help. So the participants, for instance, in this workshop agree with one another that the activities provided by the Colindale Communities Trust, the services provided by them more widely on the estate as well, this provided a form of social value that created to contribute to reduce the shortfalls of the physical and social barriers of regeneration. So this is a key term here for me to kind of highlight what all the supports that they're giving to people in terms of employment, access to employment, training, health and well-being. They're also supporting residents with housing matters, even though that was outside their remits, but because of government cuts recently, they've had to support residents increasingly with food provision as well as housing provisions. And this can be described as a form of social value. And in the UK, we have a law, particularly, and social value has now and is kind of starting to have a bit of an international appeal. People are working on it in various countries. And in the UK, we already have an act, the Public Services Act, also called the Social Value Act of 2012. It was, I will read it out to you. It requires people who commission public services to think about how they can also secure wider social, economic, and environmental benefits. So before they start their procurement process, commissioners should think about whether the services they are going to buy or the way they're going to buy them could secure these benefits for their area or stakeholders. What it means in terms of regeneration is that as developers bid for a project in a particular area designated for regeneration, they have to agree with the local authorities on social value commitments. And so this often happens between developers and local authorities, local councils, but without consulting residents and without consulting voluntary and charity sector, who often are key to the existing social value of an area, especially an area that is, as I said, suffering from deprivation, managed decline, and the impact of lingering and problematic regeneration. So my main argument is to continue to have advocacy for the role played by the voluntary and charity sector in those large housing projects, recognize their role in social value so that they are taken into account and not overlooked in the social value commitments that are decided between private developers and local authority in this para-public system that we are in the United Kingdom, but that they actually take into account civil society and people who work directly with those with residents at grassroots, understand the issues that they are living with in the correct of housing regeneration. Why? Because at the heart of a thriving urban community is the importance of local cooperation, which has been identified as a key element of the neighborhood and community standard by, for us, the regulator of social housing in their consumable standards consultation. And for me, the success of regeneration programs will be reliant on an effective consideration of the provision of social value in order to meet the needs of existing as well as new residents. So those very large-scale new developments will have such a range of people coming from different houses, living under different housing tenures, and they need a connector. And this is where we need to think carefully about how social value is considered in this case. So these are my main conclusion. Hopefully that's all been making sense. I'll stop sharing.